What if I told you a nation defaulted on its debt while announcing record growth? What if the same country received billions in rescue money, yet its core economic data can't be verified? And what if the very institutions designed to be the guardians of global financial stability, the IMF and the World Bank, knew this and signed the checks anyway? This is the story of Ethiopia in 2025. Not the Ethiopia of tourism brochures or the optimistic new horizon of prosperity promised in political speeches. This is the story of the real Ethiopia, a nation caught between a narrative of miraculous reform and the brutal reality of broken trust, crumbling statistics, and an economic program held together by little more than hope, hype, and a conspiracy of silence. Today, we peel back the layers of this grand illusion. We will follow the money, from billion-dollar IMF loans to the World Bank's quiet statistical warnings. We will untangle the web of contradictions that allows a country to be celebrated as a reformer one day and decried as a defaulter the next. And in the end, we will confront the most critical question of all. In this high-stakes game of numbers, who is telling the truth and who is profiting from the lie? To understand the depth of the deception, you must first appreciate the brilliance of the performance. Throughout late 2023 and into 2024, the Ethiopian government was the author of a compelling comeback story. Guided by its ambitious, homegrown economic reform agenda, the official narrative was one of relentless progress. State media headlines painted a vibrant picture. Inflation was finally being tamed, the Ethiopian birr was on a path to stabilization, and gold exports were surging to unprecedented heights, promising to replenish the nation's depleted foreign reserves. At international forums, leaders spoke with the confident air of success. Debt restructuring, they assured the world, was just a formality, a final step on the road to recovery. The script was optimistic, polished, and for a world eager for an African success story, deeply persuasive. But behind the curtain, the stage was beginning to crumble. While the speeches celebrated a triumphant future, a far darker reality was unraveling in the present. And in December 2023, that reality broke through the facade with a resounding crash. On December 26, 2023, Ethiopia officially defaulted on a $33 million coupon payment for its $1 billion Eurobond. It was a watershed moment, the point at which the carefully crafted narrative collided with inarguable fact. Ethiopia became the latest African nation to succumb to the crushing weight of its external debt. This single event created a paradox that could no longer be ignored. How does a country, supposedly buoyed by booming exports and a stabilizing economy, fail to make a routine interest payment? How could a government, projecting such confidence on the world stage, find itself unable to honor its most basic commitment to international lenders? The answer doesn't lie in a simple spreadsheet. It lies buried deeper, in the very foundation upon which Ethiopia's economic story was built, the data itself. To truly understand Ethiopia's illusion, you must confront the void at its center, the startling absence of credible information. It's a problem not of bad numbers, but of no verifiable numbers at all. You don't have to take my word for it. In its own Article 4 report, published in July 2025, the International Monetary Fund, the country's primary financial partner, delivered a quiet but devastating verdict. The report cites serious shortcomings in Ethiopia's national accounts, a lack of fiscal transparency, and fundamental weaknesses in its external sector statistics. Let's translate that from bureaucratic jargon into plain English. The IMF is admitting that the country's most essential economic indicators, its GDP, its inflation rate, its government revenue, even the export data it boasts about, cannot be properly verified. They are effectively flying blind. The report itself notes these gaps significantly hamper surveillance. It's like trying to navigate a passenger jet without an altimeter, a fuel gauge, or a compass. This wasn't an isolated opinion. Around the same time, the World Bank made an even more dramatic move. In its annual income classification list for July 2025, it simply omitted Ethiopia. The country was placed in a state of limbo, designated as temporarily unclassified. This is a category reserved for nations in extreme crisis or statistical collapse. The only other country sharing that designation, Venezuela. The reason was blunt. For the second year in a row, Ethiopia had failed to provide credible gross national income (GNI) data. The very measure of a nation's wealth, the bedrock of all economic analysis, was a black hole. And here, the story moves from troubling to truly baffling. Just as the world's most powerful financial institutions publicly acknowledged that they could not trust Ethiopia's numbers, they decided to reward the country with a massive infusion of cash. On July 2, 2025, the IMF's executive board approved a third review of its loan program, disbursing another $262 million to Addis Ababa. The very next day, the World Bank, despite having just rendered the country statistically unclassifiable, followed suit, announcing a staggering $1 billion package to support what it called inclusive reform. It's a decision that defies logic. It's like giving a patient a massive dose of morphine for their pain while acknowledging you can't find a pulse and have no X-ray to see the internal hemorrhaging. Buried within the triumphant press releases were the institution's own dire warnings. Donor support for Ethiopia was collapsing, falling from 12% of GDP to less than 4%. The foreign exchange market remained dangerously fragmented, with the black market rate for dollars running 15% higher than the official one. The momentum for reform, they warned, was at risk of stalling entirely. So why the bailout? Why pour billions into an economy whose vital signs were not just weak, but unreadable? To find a possible answer, we have to listen to the people who were shouting from the sidelines, the ones who had actually been betrayed. Behind the closed doors of Wall Street and London, Ethiopia's private creditors were furious. A powerful group of bondholders, representing over 40% of the defaulted Eurobond, launched a blistering public attack. These weren't activists or political opponents. They were the very capitalists who had loaned Ethiopia $1 billion in good faith. Their accusation was explosive. They claimed the IMF was knowingly using a flawed debt sustainability analysis, or DSA. They alleged that the fund had deliberately underestimated Ethiopia's real earnings, particularly from its gold and coffee exports, to artificially classify the country as insolvent rather than merely illiquid. The distinction is critical. An illiquid country has a short-term cash flow problem. It has the assets but can't pay its bills right now. An insolvent country is fundamentally bankrupt. It will likely never be able to pay its debts. By labeling Ethiopia as insolvent, the IMF could trigger mechanisms for comprehensive debt relief that would force private bondholders to accept significant losses. The creditors argued Ethiopia's problem was a temporary cash crunch, not a terminal diagnosis. They felt they were being strong-armed into a haircut to solve a problem that the IMF and other official lenders were helping to create, and they began openly considering legal action. Suddenly, the IMF's actions looked less like a paradox and more like a calculated move in a much larger game. When you connect the dots, The architecture of the illusion becomes clear. It's a self-reinforcing system built on mutual convenience. First, you have a government under immense pressure, desperate to project stability and success to its people and the world. It generates a narrative of reform, backed by statistics that are favorable, but conveniently opaque and unverifiable. Second, you have international financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. They are also under pressure to show their multi-billion-dollar programs are working, to maintain influence in a geopolitically vital region, and to have a success story to point to. They see the data is flawed. They issue their quiet warnings in dense reports, but they need the reform program to continue. So they approve the loans. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The loans provide a temporary lifeline, allowing the government to maintain the illusion of stability. This, in turn, validates the IMF's decision to lend, creating a success that exists primarily on paper. The government gets its cash, the institutions get their paperwork, and the difficult questions about fiscal truth are postponed for another day. But this illusion is not without a victim. The bill for this grand performance always comes due, and it isn't paid by the politicians in Addis Ababa or the bankers in Washington. The true cost is paid by 120 million ordinary Ethiopians. For them, the economy is not an abstract model. It is the price of bread, the cost of fuel, the availability of medicine in a rural clinic. For every billion-dollar loan celebrated in a press release, there are millions of silent, painful transactions of hardship. The currency devaluation demanded as part of the reforms means their meager savings evaporate overnight. The austerity measures required to balance the books mean shrinking subsidies on essentials. It means students protesting rising school fees and hospitals running out of basic supplies. Rising inflation, shrinking subsidies, a weakening birr, and austerity-driven reforms designed to please Paris and Washington. Not Makala, not Bahir Dar, not Jimma. These people didn't default. They didn't fudge the data. They didn't exaggerate the numbers. But they pay for it all, in their homes, in their markets, and in their hopes for a better future. The story of Ethiopia's economy in 2025 is not about a lack of money. It is about a profound lack of credibility. The most dangerous deficit the country faces today isn't in its budget, but in its integrity. The restructuring that is so desperately needed is not merely fiscal, it must be institutional. The most critical reform is not about floating a currency. It is about embracing transparency, demanding accountability, and rebuilding the shattered foundation of trust. Because reform is only real when the people can feel it in their daily lives. Growth is only real when it can be measured and believed. Until then, no headline, no handshake, and no billion-dollar loan can mask the truth. Ethiopia, its people, and indeed the world that lends to it, deserve far better than a beautiful, expensive, and ultimately hollow illusion.